14 months before the blood, before the throne, before the night she died in a northern corridor, a fire poker in her hand, and came back as something the world had never seen before. This is where it starts, in a kitchen, with a girl who had spent her whole life learning how to disappear. The laws of Duskfall Pack were simple. You served your alpha, you protected your pack, and if you were lucky, you died in battle, not in a bed. It was a place where strength decided everything, where power was seen, respected, feared, and anything weaker was forgotten. Elara Voss had learned that lesson early, so she stayed quiet. She moved through the pack house like a shadow, unnoticed, untouched, unseen, and for a long time, that was enough. Until the day it wasn't. Elara Voss had no bloodline worth recording, no rank. A wolf so quiet that even the pack elders had stopped noting her name at the monthly rolls. She had lived inside Duskfall's walls her entire life, and the man who ruled them had never once truly looked at her. Soren Blackridge, alpha of Duskfall, the kind of man the world bends around without being asked. He did not hate Elara. That would have required noticing her first, but something was coming to Duskfall, something old and dangerous, and already moving south through the unmapped forests, and it was going to force two people who had spent years existing in the same walls without ever truly seeing each other to finally look. And when they did, nothing between them would ever be the same. The first thing Elara ever learned about Duskfall Pack was that you did not make yourself memorable. She was 6 years old when her mother told her that, sitting on the edge of the narrow cot they shared in the servants' quarters, braiding Elara's hair with hands that smelled of soap and firewood. "Do your work and do it well," her mother had said. "Keep your head down. Do not give anyone a reason to look at you twice." Her voice had carried the particular calm of someone who has learned a lesson the hard way and does not want their child to learn it the same way. Elara had listened. She had always been good at listening. She was also good at the work. By the time she was 12, she knew the kitchen better than most of the senior staff. She knew which fires burned too hot on the eastern side and needed watching. She knew that the head cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Greta, kept a running inventory in a leather-bound book she believed no one else could read, and that the inventory was always 3 items short of the truth because Greta sent food to her sister's family in the village at the base of the mountain. Elara had known this for 4 years. She had never said a word about it to anyone. It was not her business. And Greta, in her own wordless way, had known that Elara knew, and had left an extra portion on her tray every morning, without either of them ever acknowledging what it meant. That was how things worked in the lower levels of Duskfall, a quiet economy of small kindnesses and unspoken debts. The kind of loyalty built not from grand gestures, but from the accumulated weight of keeping each other's small secrets over many years. Elara understood that world completely. She understood the other world. The one above the kitchen stairs, the one belonging to warriors and ranked wolves and the alpha in his inner circle. The way you understand a country you have studied but never visited. She knew its customs, its hierarchies, its unspoken rules. She simply did not belong to it, and had never made the mistake of thinking she did. This was the condition of her life, and she had made her peace with it long ago. The morning she first heard Soren Blackridge's name spoken with fear rather than respect, she was 17, standing at the base of the main staircase, with a basket of linen and no good reason to be there. She had taken a wrong turn. It happened sometimes in the older parts of the hall, where the corridors twisted back on themselves in ways that made no architectural sense. The result of 3 generations of alphas adding to the structure without ever consulting what had come before. She had been trying to reach the upper laundry and had ended up instead in the stone corridor that ran below the war room, close enough to hear voices through the ventilation gaps in the ceiling. She should have left immediately. That was what a sensible person would have done. She stayed, Not because she was looking for anything, not because she suspected what she would hear. She stayed the way you stay when something in the air changes weight and your body understands significance before your mind does. "He just killed Roan's entire patrol," a voice was saying. The voice was low, tightly controlled. The voice of someone reporting facts they would have preferred to be wrong about. All 6 of them, Roan included. For missing the eastern checkpoint by 4 hours. The silence that followed was brief. "Only 4 hours?" Another voice, this one older. "He said the rules exist for a reason." The older voice again, slower now. "What did the others say?" "Nothing. They were too afraid." Another silence, longer. And then the first voice, quieter this time. "He's going to destroy this pack from the inside before any enemy gets the chance." Elara stood in that corridor for a long moment after the voices moved away, the linen basket still in her hands, the weight of what she had heard settling somewhere in her chest with the particular heaviness of things you cannot unhear. She found the laundry room eventually. She completed her work. She did not speak of what she had overheard to anyone, but she thought about it. More than she should have. Not because she was afraid exactly. Fear would have been simpler. What she felt was something closer to the sensation you get when you look directly at the sun. The awareness of something so large and so indifferent to your existence that looking directly at it requires a particular kind of care. She thought about the 6 wolves who had been 4 hours late. She thought about the alpha who had decided what that meant. And somewhere beneath the careful logic of it, somewhere she did not examine too closely, she thought about the quality of silence that had followed that announcement. The specific silence of men who are afraid and do not want to be, who are afraid of being afraid, and will say nothing because saying nothing is the only protection they have. She understood that silence. She had been living inside a version of it her entire life. That was the day she first understood, truly understood, what Soren Blackridge was. Not a rumor, not the distant authority behind every rule she had grown up obeying, but a specific and particular kind of danger, the kind that does not announce itself. She did not see him again for 2 more years. Or rather, she saw him the way you see weather, something that exists at a remove from your daily life, that shapes the conditions of everything around you without ever requiring your direct engagement. She saw him cross the main courtyard in the early morning sometimes, always moving with that particular economy of motion that belongs to people who have never needed to perform their own authority. She saw him at the head of the long table during pack gatherings, sitting with the stillness of something that has already decided the outcome of every conversation in the room. She kept her head down. She did her work. She learned not to look directly at him for too long, the way her mother had taught her, the way the kitchen had reinforced, the way survival in Duskfall simply required. And yet, there was the morning she had been sent to the war room with a tea tray. This was not unusual. The kitchen staff rotated through service duties on a monthly schedule, and her name had come up. She had taken the tray, climbed the stairs, pushed open the heavy door, and found the room empty except for him. She had not expected that. The meeting had been listed for the full council. She had assumed she would slip in, set the tray, and leave before anyone paid her the slightest attention. Instead, it was only Soren, sitting alone at the long table with a map spread open in front of him, his hands flat against the wood on either side of it, staring at something on the map, with the focused, unguarded expression of someone who does not know they are being watched. Elara had stopped in the doorway. His eyes came up. The expression closed immediately, the way a shutter closes in wind, fast and complete. But she had seen it for a single moment before it did. Something she did not have a name for. Not quite exhaustion, not quite doubt. Something that sat between those two things, in the way certain emotions exist between the ones that have clear names. She crossed the room, set the tray at the far end of the table, and turned to leave. She had reached the door when she stopped. She was not sure what made her do it. Later, she would try to identify the exact thing, the feeling in the air, the particular quality of his silence, and she would not be able to. She simply stopped. "There is also bread," she said, without turning around. "If you have not eaten." The room was very quiet. She left. She walked back down the stairs with the empty tray and did not look back. The truth was that she had felt his eyes on her back all the way to the door, and somewhere in the part of her that was still wolf, even if that wolf was quiet and unremarkable and had never shifted into anything fiercer than pale gray, something had noticed the weight of that gaze, in a way that went deeper than observation. 3 weeks after the tea tray morning, she saw him be the man the voices in the corridor had described. It was late afternoon. She was returning from the outer stores with a crate of dried provisions, taking the long cover walkway that ran along the eastern face of the training yard. She had not planned to stop. She stopped. There was a young wolf in the training yard. He could not have been more than 16, one of the recently ranked, still at the stage where the wolf and the boy occupied the same body without having fully agreed on the terms. He was on his knees on the dirt. Soren was standing over him. She could not hear the words from where she was. She could hear the tone. Soren's voice was not raised. It never needed to be. But it carried across the training yard with the specific quality of something cold applied to an open wound. Precise and without mercy. And the boy on his knees had the expression of someone who has stopped trying to defend himself because there is no point. The other ranked wolves watching from the edges of the yard had all found reasons to look elsewhere. Soren said one final thing. The boy flinched as though struck. Soren turned and walked away. Unhurried, his expression exactly what it always was. Settled, closed, carrying nothing, as though the moment had already ceased to exist for him before he had finished walking through it. The boy remained on his knees for a long moment after he had gone. Elara picked up her crate and continued down the walkway. She thought about it for the rest of the evening, not with horror, exactly. She had grown up knowing what Soren Blackridge was, but there was something about witnessing it directly. The specific efficiency of it, the way he left no room for anything, not dignity, not recourse, not even the small grace of being seen to recover, that made it harder to hold alongside the other things she had noticed. The bread, the unguarded map, the eyes on her back. Both of those men were real. She understood this now in a way she had understood it only in theory before. It made the second man more complicated, not less. If this story has found you at the right moment, the kind of story that makes the room go quiet around you, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Follow now, so you are there when the next part arrives. Elara was 22 when the Hollowed Ones came to Duskfall. Nobody had seen them coming. That was the first thing. The thing that frightened the sentries more than the attack itself. The fact that wolves with the combined boundary sensing of an entire trained patrol had detected nothing, until the first scream came from the northern watchtower. The Hollowed Ones were what happened when a wolf pack lost its anchor. When an alpha died without succession, when the line broke, when there was no center left for the pack's collective instinct to orient around. The pack did not simply dissolve. Something older took over. Something that lived below the part of a wolf that can be reasoned with. They moved together, and they moved without mercy, absorbing the unmated, the displaced, the already lost into their ranks as they drifted. Unless, in the rarest and most dangerous of cases, a new will found them first, and bent that ancient instinct to its own purpose, pointed it, aimed it. That was the thing no one wanted to speak about. A hollowed pack, pack with a mind behind it, was not a natural disaster. It was a weapon. Duskfall was not a small settlement. Duskfall had Soren Blackridge. The night they came, Elara was in the lower kitchen when the warning bells rang. She had been there alone, finishing the last of the evening inventory. Greta had sent the others to bed early and stayed herself until a headache drove her out an hour ago. The bells were not the practice bells, the ones they ran drills with on the second Tuesday of every month. These were the real ones, the ones with the specific 2-3-2 pattern that every wolf in Duskfall learned in childhood the way they learned to breathe. Elara put down her ledger. She was not a warrior. She had no formal combat training, no ranking, no assigned position in a defense scenario. The protocol for non-combat pack members was clear. Move to the inner hall, stay below the ground level windows, wait. She had every intention of following it. She was in the corridor between the kitchen and the inner hall when she heard the sound. Not the bells. Those were everywhere by now. Something specific. A single voice, high and urgent and very close, coming from the courtyard entrance at the end of the East Passage. A voice she recognized. It was Petra. Petra had been Elara's closest thing to a friend since childhood. The kind of friendship that grows between two people who are both quiet and careful and have noticed, without discussing it, that they are the same kind of careful in the same kinds of ways. Petra worked in the outer stables. Her assigned place in an emergency was the inner hall, same as Elara. She should not have been in the East Passage at all. Elara changed direction. She found Petra at the courtyard door, one hand on the frame, the other arm pressed against her side in the particular way of someone holding something that hurts. Her face was very pale. Behind her, through the open door, the courtyard was lit orange from something burning at the wall. "I was trying to get the horses out," Petra said. Her voice was steady in the way voices get when the body decides calm is necessary and forces it. "One of them threw me. I think my arm is broken." Elara pulled her away from the door, back into the passage, further from the orange light and the sounds coming with it. "Come on," she said. "I have you." She got Petra to the inner hall, settled her against the interior wall among the others, the kitchen staff, the stable hands, the children from pack families who had housing inside the walls, and she was about to sit down beside her when she heard it. A sound from the upper level. Not the sounds of battle. Those were everywhere, had been everywhere for the last 10 minutes. Shouts and impacts and the particular silence that falls between them. This was different. A single exchange. Two voices close, and then one voice, and then nothing. And then footsteps on the upper corridor, moving fast, and beneath them something heavier. Something being dragged. Elara was at the interior staircase before she had made a conscious decision to move. She paused at the base of the stairs long enough to pull the fire poker free from the bracket beside the corridor brazier. A blunt length of iron, not quite as long as her arm, kept at every staircase in Duskfall for tending the wall torches. It was not a weapon. It was what she had. The upper corridor was dim, the wall torches guttering from some disruption in the airflow. She could see shapes at the far end, 2 of them. One standing, one on the ground. The one standing had his back to her. He was very large, and he was wearing the colors of the Hollowed, the gray and ash marking they put on their own, the remnant ritual of a pack that had lost everything except its violence. The one on the ground was Soren. Elara took in the scene in the single second she had to take it in. Soren had been set upon from behind. She could see it in the angle of him, in the specific way he was on one knee, rather than both. The posture of someone who has been caught in the moment of turning and has not fully gone down, because going fully down is not something his body knows how to do. There was blood on the left side of his face. His weapon was still in his hand, but the hollowed wolf was already raising its own. There was no thought. There was only the particular quality of the moment before an irreversible thing happens. That fraction of a second the body understands as a door about to close, and the deep, wordless knowledge that she was the only one close enough to stop it. She moved. She crossed the corridor in 4 steps and brought the poker down across the back of the hollowed wolf's forearm at the exact moment the blow was descending, and the impact ran up her arm so hard it knocked her sideways into the wall. The hollowed wolf turned. Its eyes were the particular flat silver of a wolf gone fully under, the part of a wolf that cannot negotiate, cannot be spoken to, that operates on a level below instinct and above nothing at all. It looked at her with those flat eyes, and she understood, completely and without panic, that she was about to die. She raised the poker anyway. What happened next was not something she fully processed until later. There was a sound, deep and enormous, and so close it moved the air against her face. And then Soren was between her and the hollowed wolf. He had crossed the corridor from the ground to standing to in front of her in a single movement she had not been fast enough to track. She felt the displaced air of it. She heard the collision. It was brief. When it was over, the hollowed wolf was on the ground, and Soren was standing over it, breathing hard, the blood still running down the left side of his face, his weapon in his hand. The corridor was quiet. Soren turned. He looked at her. Elara still had the fire poker raised. She lowered it. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this with a detached kind of interest. The way you notice small things when the large thing has not yet finished processing itself. Her hands were shaking, and there was a ringing in her ears, and the wall behind her was very cold through the back of her dress. Soren looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Not the way she had expected. Not with the particular dismissal she had grown up being looked at with by people of his rank. The glance that takes you in and categorizes you and moves on. He looked at her differently, directly, with a quality of attention that did not know what to do with itself, and something happened in the space between them that she had no framework for. Something in the air shifted in the way it shifts when two wolves stand too close in an enclosed space, and the older instincts stir before the conscious mind can intervene. She felt it in the base of her sternum, a low vibration that was not fear, and was not warmth, and was not anything she had a name for. Her wolf, that quiet, unremarkable thing that had never done anything worth noting in 22 years, went very still. "You should not be up here," he said. His voice was flat. Elara looked at the wolf on the floor between them. "No," she agreed. Her voice came out even, steadier than her hands. Something moved through his expression. Not quite what she would have called gratitude. She did not think that was something he had a ready expression for. Something harder to name. He opened his mouth. The bell's change pattern. 333. The all-clear call. Or the beginning of one. Ragged and interrupted. The bells of a pack that had just survived something, and was not entirely sure yet what surviving looked like. Soren's attention shifted to the end of the corridor, where sounds were beginning to resolve themselves into the sounds of aftermath rather than battle. His jaw tightened. He became, in the space of a single breath, the Alpha again, the version she had always seen from a distance, complete and closed and moving toward what needed to be done. He was already walking away when he stopped. He did not turn around. "What is your name?" he said. It carried the particular cadence of someone asking something, because they have decided they need to know the answer, not because they are interested in the conversation it might start. "Elara," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked away down the corridor toward the sounds of his pack. Elara stood where she was, the fire poker still in her hand. Her hands had stopped shaking. She looked down at them, and then back up at the empty corridor, and then at the dark shape of the hollowed wolf on the floor between her and the place where Soren had been standing. She thought about the way he had said her name, the weight of it, not like furniture, not like something in the background of a room. He had said it quietly, the way you repeat something you want to hold on to, a detail you do not want to lose, the name of a street you need to remember, the word for a thing you have only just learned exists. She set the fire poker carefully against the wall and went back down the stairs to find Petra. The battle damage to Duskfall's northern wall took 3 weeks to fully repair. In those 3 weeks, the pack moved through the particular rhythm of recovery that follows violence, the tally of the wounded, the burial of the dead, the meetings Elara could hear through the ventilation gaps when she passed below the war room, longer now and running later into the night, the voices of men reckoning with how something that large had arrived so completely unannounced. Elara went back to her work. She kept her head down. She did not discuss what had happened in the upper corridor with anyone except Petra. And even with Petra, she kept it short. On the 4th day after the battle, she was carrying a second tray of bread up from the kitchen to the main hall during the midday meal, navigating the corridor that ran along the back of the great room, when she turned a corner and almost walked directly into Soren Blackridge. She stopped. The tray stayed level. He had clearly come from the war room. He was still carrying a rolled map in one hand, and he had the look of someone moving from one obligation to the next with no pause between them. The particular, purposeful distraction of a man who runs a series of large problems simultaneously and has learned to carry them all at once without letting any of them show. He stopped when she stopped. He looked at her, not the way he had looked at her the morning of the tea tray. Something different, more careful, the look of someone who has thought about a thing and is now doing the harder work of looking at the thing directly. Elara held the tray and waited. "Go ahead," she said, because the corridor was narrow and he was blocking it. Something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptible. He stepped to the side. She passed him. She had gone perhaps 5 steps when his voice came. "You are not afraid." She stopped. He was not looking at her when she turned. He was looking at the map in his hand, or appearing to. His jaw was set in the way it always was, that particular controlled tension. But there was something in the set of his shoulders that was not quite the same as usual. Something slightly less certain. "In the corridor," she said. She knew what he meant. He did not answer immediately. "Most people would have run," he said at last. His voice carried no particular emotion. He was simply stating what he understood to be a fact. Elara considered this. There was a version of this conversation in which she said something modest, something deflecting, something that would allow both of them to move on from it cleanly. She chose a different one. "Running would not have helped," she said. He looked up from the map. Their eyes met, and she held it. The way she had learned not to do. The way years of keeping her head down had trained her against. And she held it anyway. And she watched something move through his expression that she did not fully understand. Something that started in his eyes and did not quite make it to the rest of his face, as though it had gotten part way there and stopped, because it did not know what it was doing. He said nothing else. He turned and walked back the way he had come. Elara turned and walked the way she had been going. She saw him 3 more times in the following week. Once in the main courtyard, where she was crossing with an armful of dried herbs from the outer garden, and he was speaking with 2 of his senior warriors at the far end. He did not acknowledge her, but she was certain, in the particular way that has no proof, that he had registered her presence before she registered his. Once at the base of the eastern staircase, where she was coming down and he was going up, and the staircase was wide enough that neither of them needed to pause. He paused anyway, only for a fraction of a second. She kept moving and pretended not to notice. And once in the evening, from the upper kitchen window that looked out over the training yard, she had been cleaning the wide stone sill and had looked out without thinking, the way you look out of windows when your hands are busy and your mind has gone somewhere else. And he had been in the training yard alone. No sparring partner, no audience, moving through a combat sequence with the kind of focused private intensity of someone who trains not to be watched. There was a quality to it she had never seen in him in public, something that looked almost like relief, the particular release of a person who spends most of their waking hours performing a version of themselves and has found a few minutes when they do not have to. She had looked away, quickly. She had gone back to cleaning the sill, but she had thought about it. The expression on his face in the training yard. The way it had looked exactly like the expression on his face when he was staring at the map that first morning, unguarded, private, the face underneath the alpha. It was Petra who said it first, because Petra always said the things that Elara was carefully not saying. They were sitting in the lower garden in the evening, the one the kitchen staff used on their off hours, a small walled square with a stone bench and a pear tree that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Petra's arm was out of its binding. She was moving it carefully, testing the range, the way you test a repaired thing to see whether it holds. He asked about you, Petra said. Elara looked at the pear tree. What? Petra kept her eyes on her arm. Soren. He asked Greta who you were, what your duties were, how long you had worked in the kitchen. Elara was quiet for a moment. Why would Greta tell you that? She said finally. Petra glanced at her with the expression of someone who has been patient and has decided patience has its limits. Because Greta told me, and Greta told me because Greta has eyes and is very nosy and likes you. And because the Alpha of Duskfall asking about one of the kitchen staff is not an event that goes unremarked. Elara looked at the pear tree for a while. He was probably just noting who was in the corridor that night, she said, for the official account of the incident. Petra said nothing. The silence had a very specific quality. Elara, Petra said eventually, with the measured calm of someone choosing their words with care. He asked Greta how old you were. Elara's hands were very still in her lap. That does not mean anything, she said. No, Petra agreed pleasantly. Probably not. The pear tree was the same as it had always been, old and crooked and wholly indifferent to everything happening beneath it. Elara went to bed early that night and lay in the dark. This story is told one part at a time. If you want to be there for the next one, follow the channel. It takes 1 second, and it means everything. What she could not have known was that, on the same night, 1 floor above her in the hall, Soren Blackridge sat at his desk with the duty ledger open in front of him. He was not reading it. He had been not reading it for a while. The fire had burned down to low coals. The room was quiet in the way rooms get when it is very late and the rest of the building has gone to sleep. He was good at this kind of quiet, usually. He had always preferred it to the kind of quiet that is merely the absence of noise, which is a different thing entirely, a lesser thing. He sat in it and did not read the ledger and thought, against his better judgment, about a girl in a corridor with a fire poker and no fear. Not no fear. He corrected himself. That was not what it had been. He had enough experience of people who had no fear to know what that looked like, and it looked nothing like her. She had been afraid. He had seen it in the stillness of her, the way she had held herself against the wall with the particular rigidity of someone who is afraid and has decided that the only thing worse than being afraid would be letting it win. That was different. What bothered him more, what he could not file under any category he had, was the other thing. The thing that had happened in the corridor when he turned and found her there. It had not been the ordinary assessment a man makes when he looks at a woman. It had been something below that, something his wolf had done without consulting him, a recognition that arrived before he had finished processing what he was seeing, a low and wordless certainty that had no rational basis, and that he had been trying to dismiss ever since. He had known her name before that night. He realized this sitting at his desk in the quiet. He had known it the way you know the names of things you have grown up around without ever making a conscious effort to learn them. She had been in this hall her entire life. She had served him tea once, years ago, and said something small and practical and true. And he had told himself he had not thought about it again. He was less certain of that than he had been a week ago. He closed the ledger without having read any of it and went to stand at the window. The courtyard below was empty and dark. The repaired section of the northern wall was visible from here. the new stone lighter than the old, a pale seam running through the dark. It would weather eventually. In 5 years, you would not be able to tell where the break had been. He stood at the window for a while. He was not sure what he was thinking. That was unusual enough to be worth noting. He was generally very clear about what he was thinking, because clarity was how you ran a pack. How you made decisions, how you kept everything from grinding itself apart. Clarity was not optional. It was survival. He was not clear about this. He turned away from the window and went to bed. The second time the hollowed ones came, there was no warning at all. It was 31 days after the first attack. The repair work on the northern wall was still 2 days from completion. The scaffolding running along the interface of the breakpoint was still up. The stone still green-smelling and damp. The mortar not yet fully cured. It was midday. That was the thing no one had accounted for. Every protocol, every defense plan, every assigned position in Duskfall's emergency procedures assumed the cover of darkness. Because that was when things came. Night was the dangerous time. Night was when you ran the heavy patrols and doubled the watchtower sentries and kept the torches burning every 15 feet along the inner wall. Nobody came at midday. Except they did. Elara was in the outer kitchen garden when it started. She was harvesting the last of the autumn rosemary, working quickly because the frost was going to come early this year. She could feel it in the way the ground had already begun to harden at the edges of the stone path. She had her basket over one arm and she was working down the row when the sound came. Not a bell. The bells hadn't had time. The sound came first, and then the bells. And in between those two things, there was a fraction of a second in which everything in the garden was perfectly still. The herbs and the frost-hardened earth and the early afternoon light lying flat and pale across all of it, and Elara standing in the middle of it with rosemary in her hands, and the world holding its breath. Then everything happened at once. The outer wall was breached in 3 places simultaneously. This was the part that the Pack's defense counsel would examine afterward with a kind of grim professional attention. The coordination of it, the fact that 3 separate weaknesses in the wall had been identified and exploited within seconds of each other. It was not the attack of a pack that had lost its reason. It was organized, targeted. Something had changed in the Hollowed in the weeks between the first attack and this one, and whatever had changed, it was not something anyone had anticipated. Elara dropped the basket and ran. Not toward the inner hall. She knew before she reached the gate that the inner hall was not going to be accessible the way it had been last time. The sound was already wrong for that, already coming from the wrong direction. She made the decision in the second she came through the garden gate and saw the courtyard. There were people in the courtyard who should not still be in the courtyard. 6 of them. 7. Pack members who had not made it inside before the outer gate was cut off, now stranded in the open space between the main hall and the outer wall, trying to reach the secondary entrance on the eastern side. Among them, she could see 2 children. The youngest could not have been more than 5. Elara did not think. She crossed the courtyard. She reached them. She got them moving. The children first, then the others, pushing them in the right direction, toward the secondary entrance, which was still clear, still open. The sounds from the outer wall, not yet close enough on that side. She was at the secondary entrance herself, holding it open when she saw him. Soren was in the middle of the training yard, which the courtyard opened onto, fighting 2 hollowed wolves simultaneously. This was not the situation she had seen in the upper corridor. One opponent, close quarters, the disadvantage of surprise. This was different. This was what Soren Blackridge looked like when the conditions favored him, when there was space and both hands free in the full measure of whatever he was, and she had never seen it before. She watched him move. The particular contained ferocity of it. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. Every motion with a single purpose, and serving it completely. The 2 hollowed wolves were larger than him. That was not a relevant variable. He took them down. It took perhaps 90 seconds. When it was over, he was breathing hard, and there was fresh blood on his arm. A cut along the forearm. Not deep. The kind that bleeds more than it threatens. He turned. He saw her standing in the open doorway. Something moved across his face. "Get inside," he said. His voice was rough at the edges in a way she had not heard before. She went inside. She held the door for him. He was the last one through, before it was barred. In the silence of the secondary passage, with the sounds of the fighting muffled by 2 feet of stone wall, Elara became aware of several things at the same time. One was that the cut on Soren's forearm was bleeding more steadily than it should. One was that she was the only person in the passage besides him, the others having moved deeper into the hall, and one was that he was looking at her with an expression she did not know how to categorize. "There is cloth in the kitchen stores," she said, because something needed to be said, and that was the most useful thing. He looked at his arm as though he had forgotten about it. She went to the kitchen stores. She came back with a strip of clean cloth and a small jar of the drawing salve Greta kept on the second shelf. He was where she had left him, his back against the stone wall, his eyes closed. Not from the wound, she understood. From the particular exhaustion of the thing his body had just done. The specific cost of that kind of fighting. The way it takes everything, and then requires you to still be standing. He opened his eyes when she came back. She held out the cloth. For a moment he did not move. Then he held out his arm. She wound the cloth around the cut, not looking at his face, keeping her attention on what her hands were doing, which was the sensible place to keep it. He was very still. The passage was very quiet. She could hear her own breathing. She was close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. Not just body heat, something else underneath it. Something her wolf recognized the same way it had in the corridor. That low, wordless pull that had no rational explanation and that she was becoming less able to dismiss each time it happened. She kept her eyes on the bandage. She tied it off. She stepped back. He was looking at her. This time he did not look away. "Elara," he said. Her name, the same way as the first time, carrying the same weight it had carried then. She waited. "Why?" he said, and stopped. She looked at him. The question was unfinished, but she understood it. The why of the fire poker, the why of not running, the why of everything. And she chose the part of the honest answer she was sure of. Because someone had to, she said. The silence that followed was different from the silences before. Something in his face did the thing she had watched it try to do twice and stop. It made it all the way through this time. She did not have a word for what it was. It was not softness, not exactly. It was something that lived near softness without being it. The particular expression of a person who has just heard something that landed somewhere they did not know they had an opening. He opened his mouth. From the far end of the passage came the sound of running footsteps. His second in command appeared around the corner, face urgent, the report already forming before he had finished the turn. Soren straightened, the expression closed. The alpha was back, complete and immediate and absolute, the same way a tide comes in, without apology, without acknowledgement that it had ever been out. He was already moving by the time the report started. Elara pressed herself against the wall to let them pass. She stood in the empty passage, alone after they had gone. The strip of cloth from his wound was still in her hands. She had not realized she was still holding it. She set it down carefully on the stone shelf beside the salve jar. She went back to the kitchen. The attack was repelled. The damage to the outer wall was significant this time, more significant than the first breach. And the 3 simultaneous points of entry told. Soren's war council something they did not want to know, that the Hollowed were no longer simply drifting. They had direction, and Duskfall, for reasons that were not yet fully clear, was their direction. The council meetings ran for 3 days straight. Elara heard fragments through the ventilation gaps when she passed below the war room, enough to understand the shape of it, not enough to understand the full strategy Soren was building in response, though she could hear from the voices that he was building one, methodical, relentless, the way he did everything. On the 3rd day, she was carrying supplies to the upper stores when she turned a corner and found herself outside the war room, the door partially open. She could hear him inside, not his words, only his voice, lower than it was in the large meetings, the register of someone working through something alone. She stood in the corridor for a moment, then the door opened. Soren stood in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. The corridor was lit by 2 torches, and in the unsteady light of them, she could see that he had not slept, or had not slept enough, the particular quality that 3 days of consecutive pressure leave on a face. Neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. Elara looked at the open door. She looked at him. She went in. The war room of Duskfall was not a large space. It was not the dimensions of the room that made it feel small. It was the way Soren occupied it. The way certain people have of filling a space not with noise or movement, but with presence alone, so that whatever room they are in arranges itself around them without their having to ask. He had gone back to the table. The map was still spread open in front of him, and he was standing over it, both hands flat against the wood, the same way she had seen him that first morning, years ago, through an open door. For a moment she thought he had already forgotten she was there. Then he said, without looking up, "You have been in this hall your entire life, since I was born," she said. He looked up then. There was something in his expression she had not seen before. Not the closed version, not the careful version, not even the unguarded version she had glimpsed twice now through the gaps in his composure. Something that simply was him looking at her and not trying to be anything in particular while he did it. "In all that time," he said, "have you ever left the pack grounds?" She thought about it. Genuinely thought about it the way she did with questions that deserved a real answer. "Twice," she said. "Once to the village at the base of the mountain when I was 14, with Greta for the autumn supply run. Once when I was 19 to the eastern tree line with a group from the lower quarters who wanted to see the frost maples before the first snow." He absorbed this. "You have lived your entire life inside these walls," he said, "and you are not afraid of anything in them." She considered arguing with this. It was not precisely accurate. She had been afraid of many things inside these walls at many different points in her life. "I have been afraid of plenty of things," she said. "I just did not find running away from them to be particularly useful." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, so brief she might have imagined it. He looked back at the map. "The hollowed are not going to stop," he said. His voice had shifted back into the register she associated with council rooms, flat and direct, information being delivered without decoration. "They have been moving south for 2 seasons, and Duskfall is not an accident. They are coming here specifically. We do not fully understand why yet." Elara was quiet. He continued. "In 2 days, I am sending a scouting party north to track the Hollowed back to their last territory and find out what changed them. What made them organized? What gave them a direction?" He paused. "I want you in the party." The room was very still. Elara looked at him. He was looking at the map. "I am not a scout," she said. "I think you know that." "I know that," he said. "You are also the only person in this pack who ran toward a courtyard full of trapped civilians during a midday breach, when every trained warrior in the building was either engaged or moving to engagement positions." He paused briefly. "You got 7 people out, including 2 children." She had not known he knew that. "What I need," he continued, "is not a fighter. I have fighters. What I need is someone who can move through uncertain terrain without losing their head, assess a situation with accuracy, and make a decision under pressure without requiring a chain of command to authorize it. He looked up. You have demonstrated all three of those things twice in the space of 3 weeks. Elara looked at him for a long moment. I have never been outside the pack grounds beyond what I told you, she said. I know. I have no tracking skills, no combat training, no knowledge of the Northern Territory. I know that too. Then why? She said. He held her gaze. Because I trust your judgment, he said. And right now, in the situation we are in, that is rarer than combat training. The silence that followed had a different quality from the others, denser somehow, more aware of itself. Elara had spent her whole life making herself easy to overlook. She had done it deliberately, skillfully, with the particular expertise of someone who has understood since childhood that invisibility is a form of safety. She had never wanted to be seen. She had certainly never wanted to be needed. She looked at the map on the table between them, the Northern Territory marked in gray, the border between the known and the unmapped, rendered as a line of careful ink that did not pretend to know what lay beyond it. All right, she said. He nodded. Once. The way he accepted information rather than the way he accepted a gift. The party leaves at first light 2 days from now, he said. Do you have boots suitable for the northern ground? The question was so practical, so specifically Ungran, that something in her chest did an unexpected thing. Yes, she said. Good. He went back to the map. Elara turned toward the door. Elara, she stopped. He had not moved. He was still looking at the map. But there was something different in the line of his shoulders. Some tension that had not been there a moment ago. A held quality, like a breath that has not yet decided whether to come out. What you did in the corridor, he said. The first night. She waited. He did not finish the sentence for a moment. It was the first time in many years that someone acted without waiting to be told to. The words landed quietly, without weight, apparently, but she felt them. He still did not look up. She left. She stood in the corridor outside the war room, with her back against the cool stone and her eyes on the far wall, and the particular stillness that arrives when you have just heard something you were not prepared for, and your body needs a moment before your mind can properly start on it. She thought about what it meant, not what it meant about her, what it meant about him, about the years of standing at the head of a pack with complete authority, and no one willing to act without being authorized, because authorizing everything was how he had built his power. And no one had understood, perhaps including himself, what it cost. She pushed away from the wall. She went back down the stairs. She told Petra that night, in the lower garden, in the dark. Petra listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Elara finished, Petra looked at the pear tree for a while. Then she said, He asked you personally. Yes. Not through Greta, not through a messenger, not through the duty roster. No. He brought you to the war room and asked you himself. Elara looked at her. Do not. I was not going to say anything, Petra said. You were about to say something. I was going to say that the provisions will be heavy, and you should ask for the smaller pack frame, the one with the adjusted shoulder straps, because the standard one will give you blisters by midday on the northern ground. A pause. That is all you were going to say? Elara asked. That, Petra said pleasantly, and also that I have never once heard of Soren Blackridge asking anyone personally for anything. The pear tree stood in the dark exactly as it always had. Elara looked at it for a while. It does not mean anything, she said. Petra said nothing. The silence said quite a lot. The scouting party left 2 hours before dawn. There were 6 of them. Kale, Soren's most senior tracker, lean and quiet, with the particular economy of someone who has spent most of his adult life moving through terrain that punished noise. 2 warriors named Bryn and Oscar, both experienced in Northern Territory, both carrying the specific alertness of people who had been briefed on the Hollowed and were taking the briefing seriously. a young wolf named Daw, who served as the party's communication runner, fast enough to cover ground quickly if something needed to be brought back to Duskfall, and Elara, and Soren. She had not known he was coming until she arrived at the northern gate in the dark with her pack, and found him already there. Standing with Kyle over a route map by torchlight, dressed for the terrain in a way that made him look different from the alpha she had spent her whole life watching from a distance. The layers of authority were still there. They would always be there, but something about the practical clothing, the absence of the formal context, made him look more like a person and less like a position. He did not acknowledge her arrival specifically. He was in the middle of a conversation with Kale about a ridge crossing, and he finished it before he looked around at the assembled party and said, "We move." They moved. The northern territory of Duskfall opened differently than the pack grounds. The pack grounds had the particular quality of a place that had been inhabited for generations, a density of history in the earth itself, the way long settled places carry a specific weight of presence. The north was the opposite of that. The trees grew taller and further apart, the ground softer and less predictable, the light thinner even in the hours after dawn. There was a quality to the air that Elara found difficult to describe, only that it felt less filtered than the air she was used to, more directly itself. She kept pace with the party without difficulty. This surprised her slightly. She had been half expecting to struggle, to fall behind, to be the visible weak point she had worried about being when she accepted the assignment, but her legs knew the rhythm of long movement from years of kitchen work on stone floors, and the pack sat well on her shoulders. She said very little. So did most of the party. Trail movement was not a conversational context, and she adapted to its particular silence the way she adapted to most silences, by inhabiting it without filling it. Soren moved at the front with Kale. Elara moved in the middle of the group. They made camp in the early evening at a shallow depression between two ridges that Kale identified as defensible. The night was cold and clear, and the sky above the northern trees was a different sky than the one above Duskfall. Deeper somehow, more stars visible through the thinner air. Elara sat on a flat stone at the edge of the camp with her ration in her hands, eating slowly and looking at the tree line. "You are not eating," she turned. Soren had come to stand a few feet away, at the edge of the firelight, looking out at the same tree line. He was holding his own ration. "I am eating," she said. "I was thinking at the same time." He glanced at her. The firelight made his expression harder to read than usual. "What were you thinking about?" he said. "I was thinking that the air is different up here," she said. "Heavier somehow. Not heavy like weight. Heavy like it has more inside it." He was quiet for a moment. "It is the mineral content of the northern ridges," he said. "The rock bleeds into the air. The wolves who lived in this territory generations ago developed a slightly stronger sense of smell because of it. There is more to smell." "Has anyone mapped it?" she said. "The northern territory. Properly." "Not for 2 generations, he said. "The last complete survey was done under my grandfather's time as Alpha. It is one of the things that made this possible. The hollowed moved through unmapped ground, and we had no advance warning because we had no accurate intelligence about what that ground looked like." "That could be fixed," she said. He looked at her. Not quickly. The way he looked at things he was considering carefully. "Yes," he said. "It could." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the dark beyond the tree line something moved, too distant and too small to matter. And the 2 warriors on watch registered it and let it pass. Elara finished her ration. She was aware of him still standing at the edge of the firelight, looking out at the dark. Not restless, not performing patience, simply present in the particular way that was his, that she understood now was not coldness and had never been coldness. It was containment, the specific discipline of someone who has learned that everything he shows becomes something the world tries to use. She stood, picked up her pack, and went to her position for the first sleep watch. On the morning of the second day, they crossed a ridge where the path narrowed to a ledge of wet stone, barely a foot wide, the drop on the left obscured by morning fog. Cale went first, then Bryn, then Oscar, then Daw, each one moving sideways along the rock face, with their backs to the mountain. Elara went fifth. She was 3 steps in when her boot found a loose section of stone, and it shifted beneath her weight, her body lurching sideways toward the drop. Her hand shot out. Soren's hand closed around her wrist. He had been directly behind her. She had not known that. She had assumed he would be last, watching the rear the way an alpha watches when his people are in a dangerous place. But he was directly behind her, and his hand was around her wrist, and the grip was firm and immediate. The instinct of someone who moved before thinking, because the thinking would have been too slow. She found her footing, pressed herself back against the rock face. Her heart was hitting hard. He did not release her wrist immediately. She was aware of his hand, the way you are aware of something hot held close to skin. Not burning, just present, undeniably present. Her wolf went very quiet in the particular way it got quiet when something significant was happening, and it did not want to interfere with the processing of it. Then he let go. She continued across the ledge. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. They found the first sign of the hollowed on the 3rd day. It was not a body. It was a territory marker, the kind a pack leaves at the edge of its claimed ground, a series of carvings in the bark of 3 trees at the same height, the same pattern repeated 3 times. Cale crouched in front of the nearest one and studied it for a long time without speaking. "It is recent," he said finally. 2 weeks, maybe less. And it is not the marker of a pack that has lost its anchor. He stood. His face was careful in the way it gets when someone is choosing how to say something difficult. This is the marker of a pack that has found one. The party went very still. Elara looked at the carvings. She could not read the specific meaning of the patterns the way Cale could, but she could see what he meant. The marks were clean and deliberate, not the chaotic scratching of a group moving without direction. Someone had stood here and made these marks with intention. "The hollowed have an alpha," Soren said. It was not a question. Cale nodded. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people processing information that changes the shape of everything they understood before they received it. Elara looked at the tree line. She thought about the coordinated attack, the 3 simultaneous breach points, the midday timing, the deliberate choice of the hour when Duskfall's protocols were built around darkness. Someone had known those protocols. The thought arrived quietly and stayed. She looked at Soren. He was looking at the marker. His expression was the closed one, but there was something underneath it she was beginning to be able to read, a specific tension around his jaw that appeared when he was thinking hard about something he did not yet have enough information to fully form. "Soren," she said. He looked at her. "The timing of the second attack," she said. The 3 breach points. Someone knew where the weaknesses in the wall were. Someone knew which hours the heavy patrols ran. The party was very still. Soren held her gaze. She continued. The Hollowed did not develop organization on their own and then happened to arrive at Duskfall. Someone organized them and pointed them here, and whoever did it knows Duskfall's defenses from the inside. The words settled into the cold air of the northern forest and stayed there. Cale was looking at her. The 2 warriors were looking at her. Daw had gone very still, in the way young wolves go still when they hear something that rearranges their understanding of the situation they are in. Soren did not look away from her face. "How long have you been thinking that?" he said. "Since the second attack," she said. "I did not say it because I was not certain. I am still not certain, but the marker makes it more likely." Something passed through his expression, quick and precise, that she could not fully categorize, something she had not seen before. Then he turned to Cale. "We mark this position and we go back," he said. "We have what we came for." The return took 2 days. They moved faster than they had going north, with the particular efficiency of a party that has found what it was looking for and understands that what it found requires action. On the second afternoon, an hour before the tree line opened back into the familiar air of the pack grounds, Soren fell into step beside her. This had not happened before. He had moved at the front with Kale throughout the journey. She had moved in the middle. The arrangement had been consistent, and she had understood it as the arrangement. He said nothing for a while. He simply walked at the same pace, at the same distance, and she adjusted to this without comment, because she had become, over the past several days, more comfortable with his silences than she had expected to be. "You were right," he said at last, "about the breach points. When we return," he said, "I will need to run a quiet examination of everyone with access to the defensive rotation schedules, without alerting whoever it is before we have identified them." She nodded. "I can help with that," she said. "People talk in kitchens in ways they do not talk elsewhere. They assume the staff is not listening." He glanced at her sideways. "Are they wrong?" he said. "Usually," she said. That thing happened at the corner of his mouth again. More clearly this time, not quite hidden before it arrived. She looked away before she did something foolish. They walked the rest of the way in silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence. That, in itself, was something worth noticing. Duskfall looked the same when they came through the northern gate. The stone walls, the familiar smell of fire and pine, and the specific, living smell of a large pack in close quarters, the sounds of evening settling over the grounds. It looked different now, not in its details, in the way she was seeing it. Something had shifted in the angle of her perception. The way things look different when you have been away from them long enough to see them as a whole, rather than as the individual parts you move through without registering. She stopped just inside the gate and looked at it, the hall, the training yard, the towers at the four corners, the kitchens with their lights still burning in the evening hour. Greta's domain, steady and constant and reliable in a way very few things had ever been. Soren stopped beside her. She had not heard him. She simply became aware of his presence, the way she had been becoming aware of it over the past 4 days. Before she had the visual confirmation, the way the air in a room changes when someone enters it. Her wolf stirred the same way it had in the corridor and the passage. That low, quiet recognition she had stopped trying to explain away and had simply started carrying. The way you carry something you do not yet have a name for. He was looking at the hall too. "We have work to do," Soren said. His voice was quiet, not the council voice, the other one. "Yes," she said. He did not move for another moment, neither did she. Then he walked toward the hall, and she went toward the kitchen, and the distance between them opened back up into the distance it had always been. Elara walked through the familiar door into the familiar smell of bread and fire, and Greta's particular brand of organized chaos. She set her pack down. She let herself stand still for a moment. Petra appeared from the inner stores and stopped when she saw her. "You are back," Petra said. "Yes." Petra looked at her face for a moment with the specific attention she had for the things she did not ask directly. "Are you all right?" she said. Elara thought about this. "I think so," she said. "I'm not sure yet." Petra nodded, in the way of someone who understands that this is a complete and honest answer and does not require anything further right now. "There is hot food," she said, "and I saved you the good bread." Elara sat down at the kitchen table. She ate the bread. She thought about northern air and bark carvings, and a man standing at a gate looking in at the thing he held together, and the particular expression he got when he had not slept, and the way he had said her name in a corridor, like it was something he needed to hold on to. And she thought about the thing her wolf had been doing for weeks now, that low, wordless pull it had no framework for, the way it had gone still the first time he looked at her directly, the way it stirred whenever he was close. She thought about all of it. Then she washed her hands and went back to work. Part 2 is coming, and when it does, Elara and Soren will face something that cannot be outrun, outfought, or ignored. Follow the channel now so you are there when it arrives. And if this story moved you, leave a comment. Even one word. It tells the story where to go next.